Okay, so notice that I have left a wide margin over here. You can take notes over here. I would write really small. You might also want to have a sheet of notebook paper, and then on that notebook paper, write things like paragraph 1, and whatever doesn't fit here, you could write on your sheet of notebook paper. So let's start with the title. Just reading the title, we already see what it is that we are going to, or that Stace is going to focus on in the excerpt that I have pulled from a larger work. So the larger work is called Religion and the Modern Mind. That said, that is not the focus of the excerpt that I have pulled out of a larger piece, a book. Rather, we're going to focus on what he has to say about compatibilism in the context of something else he is discussing. But this right here will not at all be mentioned. He is not going to talk about religion and or how it connects to the modern mind. Rather, he's going to focus in this part of a larger work, how he is a compatibilist and how a compatibilist knows, he says, account of how he's going to explain and defend how free will is possible. And of course, we know that since he's compatibilist, he is a soft determinist, meaning he believes in universal causation, metaphysical determinism. So the way that this proceeds, and this is exactly the way I would do it in class, is I would have students volunteer to read a paragraph, and then we would stop and I would ask questions, and students would answer questions, and then based on their answers, once I got them to the kind of answer that I was looking for, we would mark up this passage and write additional notes. So one thing you could do is, if you noticed, I have uploaded this as a Word document, so that if you want to, you can mark this up in some way. I think the easiest way to do this, however, is to print it and then to mark it up. Make sure that you refer to this document and make sure that you take very careful notes so that you can submit what you need to submit for this item. You are doing this at the end of a task for a given bundle. Know that this is going to be the most involved task and that you'll spend a lot more time writing a response for this item in this task. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Since I don't have students to volunteer to read, that means that I will be reading, but you can read along with me, and then I'll tell you, we'll mark up the passage in some way or whatnot. I'm not saying we're doing argument clarification with respect to this whole thing. I'm just saying we're going to be taking notes together. Joint critical reading, joint note-taking. Okay, so he says I. So remember what I told you guys at the beginning of the semester? Philosophers like to speak in first person because that's the whole point of philosophy, is to state what you think. And we don't pretend that it's not I, the person who's speaking, that is speaking, or try to hide them behind some other, tense. So he says I. He says, I shall first discuss the problem of free will. For it is certain that if there is no free will, there can be no morality. Morality is concerned with what men ought and ought not to do. But if a man has no freedom to choose what he will do, if whatever he does is done under compulsion, that is, he's compelled to do it, like forced to do it, then it does not make sense to tell him that he ought not to have done what he did and that he ought to do something different. All moral precepts would in such case be meaningless. Also, if he acts under such compulsion, how can he be held morally responsible for his actions? How can he, for example, be punished for what he could not help but doing? Okay, so in this paragraph, what is he doing? And again, you should take some notes out here to the side. So I'm not going to type up or write anything here, but you might want to take some notes for when it's time for you to address the prompt that I give you at the end of the series of videos that come with this document. So basically here, he's giving us the context for what he's going to talk about in his book about religion and modern mind, and he's telling us that he first has to discuss a philosophical, metaphysical problem, the metaphysical problem being that of free will, the free will debate. And you see that he continues to use the same words over and over again, right? And he's saying basically that we've got to figure out this free will issue, or we need to be clear about the free will issue, because there are implications for our other ideas. So think about that in terms of your own meaning-making lens, your own philosophy of life. How well do your different ideas, your ideas about your metaphysical ideas, especially about free will, choice, and causality, connect to your ideas about whether or not we could have done otherwise? How do those ideas that you have connect to your ideas about morality and right and wrong? I mean, right and wrong seem to presuppose that we do have something called a choice, a genuine choice, and it presupposes that we really do have the capacity to choose between two choices. As he points out, not only are these ideas that we have or assumptions that we have about free will, morality, right and wrong, and choice interconnected, but this set of concepts are connected to our assumptions about punishment as well. And you picked up on that in the reading. In the reading in the Learn Smart task, Lawhead not only discusses metaphysical issues regarding causality and whether or not free will is possible, he also connects that to whether we can hold people responsible for their actions, right? So depending on what you think about, depending on whether or not you believe in universal causality, whether or not you think that's compatible with free will, is going to have implications as to whether you think we can hold people responsible for their actions. And that in and of itself has implications for whether or not you think people, whether it makes any sense to punish people. So what I'd like to do here is make sure that you know what the purpose of this paragraph is. It's to set the context for his book, Religion in the Modern Mind. He's identifying a problem or an issue that he thinks needs to be cleared at first. It's a metaphysical problem that he has to get into, and he's raising some issues with respect to how your take on free will has implications to your take on other things. Here, I would just like you to note which words are repeated over and over again, telling us what words are functioning as fundamental and powerful concepts in his meaning-making lens. Hence, we're employing intellectual empathy. So of course, free will, that's the core concept for the whole passage. Now, I am just doing this purely by video, but if I were using a hard copy, I would draw a triangle over free will. So free will is obviously the core concept of this entire text. And then if I was going to draw a triangle over other words, it would include, and each time you see the word being used, you want to draw a triangle over it or highlight it, because every time you see it, the more you see it, the more you realize how important, how fundamental and powerful that concept is that is named by that word is to their thinking. So we would do free will again, then we'd do morality, and then we'd have another triangle over morality here, and then we would have freedom, choose, we would also have compulsion, we would also have moral precepts, meaningless, compulsion, morally responsible, so a triangle that kind of goes over both of these, and then here, punished, we would have a triangle as well. So then, similar to what you've done with other aspects of this Blackboard created review, I might ask you later to create a list of fundamental and powerful concepts that set the stage for what he will be focusing on in the rest of this piece. This tells you also, not only does it give you the context for why he's focusing on a particular problem, but it also, like I said, it teases out the implications and consequences for other things. This is something that he needs to deal with. So yeah, I might ask you for a list of fundamental and powerful concepts, and then you have to tell me how many times he references each concept. And notice how he does go from the concept of free will to our concept of punishment. One's take on free will has implications for other concepts, including that of punishment. Okay, so now let's go ahead and go to the second paragraph. So notice, I've spent just this much time on one paragraph. I may not spend this much time on all paragraphs, but the first 2 or 3 or 4 really set the stage for what he does later. So let's just keep going, noting that we are doing a close, attentive, careful reading of philosophical text. All right, so it is to be observed, so paragraph 2, if you're taking notes on paper, go ahead and write paragraph 2. It is to be observed that those learned professors of philosophy or psychology who deny the existence of free will do so only in their professional moments in their studies and lecture rooms. For when it comes to doing anything practical, even of the most trivial kind, they invariably behave as if they and others were free. So a question and issue that he's asking us here is, how do professors who deny free will actually behave? Another way to formulate the question is, do professors who deny free will act contrary to their theories about free will? In other words, is there an alignment in terms of what a professor denying free will and whether or not he behaves as if there is free will. They inquire from you at dinner whether you will choose this dish or that dish. They will ask a child why he told a lie and will punish him for not having chosen the way of truthfulness. All of which is inconsistent with a disbelief in free will. So this is all of this asking people what their choices, what they want, and why they did something rather than another thing. They're saying this is inconsistent with free will, because if you deny free will, then none of this would make sense to say that you had a choice to do otherwise, or even have a choice at all. This should cause us to suspect that the problem is not a real one, and this, I believe, is the case. The dispute is merely verbal and is due to nothing but a confusion about the meaning of words. This is what is now fashionably called a semantic problem. So he's saying, look, the fact that the professors their behavior does not align with their denial of free will, that is, their metaphysical theory, shows that there is not a real problem here. And as he says, if you're going to underline anything in here, it would be the dispute is merely verbal and is due to nothing but a confusion about the meaning of words. Okay, so let me see if I want to continue on with this video. All right, so that's all I'll have for this part of this video.